Settle in. Imagine yourself sinking softly into a comfortable place, the room dim and quiet, the edges of the day smoothing out like a shoreline at dusk. Tonight we are going to drift through the long game of parasites, the slow coevolutionary tedium between host and hitchhiker, and more gently winding pathways nearby. Before we wander too far, if this calm corner of the internet helps you rest, please like this video and subscribe, and if you want continuous company while you doze, there is a playlist in the description that will keep playing softly while you drift. How sleepy are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Imagine a vast landscape of time, wide and soft, where each moment of life is like a small ripple, overlapping with the next. In that landscape, relationships are stretched across generations, like a thread looped again and again through fabric. Parasites and their hosts share a very old story. It is not a loud story. It is a story of tiny adjustments and slow recognition, of gentle locks and keys that fit a little better or a little worse with each passing season. You find yourself breathing more evenly, almost as if your breath were matched to those slow adjustments. The rhythm is steady, and the details unfold without hurry. A parasite, in a quiet sense, is a visitor that relies on a host for a safe place to live, a source of nourishment, and a way to continue its lineage. Sometimes the visitor is microscopic. Sometimes it is a plant that leans on another plant like a patient climber on a fence. Sometimes it is a cunning strategy rather than a tiny body, as in the case of a bird that lays its eggs in another's nest and lets a bewildered foster parent take up the quiet work of care. Through time, the host nudges the visitor back, not with dramatic confrontations, but with slow changes to its defenses, small edits to how it recognizes friend from stranger, subtle shifts in behavior. The visitor, in turn, leans and adjusts, trying to remain just welcome enough to be present, without pushing so far as to be noticed and removed. In this long game, equilibrium is hydra-headed and gentle, like a flock of clouds that slowly change shape without drawing attention to any one moment of change. Imagine yourself watching a tide pool under starlight. You can see faint ripples that keep returning to the same rock, polishing it a little more each time, smoothing out sharpness. Coevolution is like that. Each tide is a generation, each ripple a mutation, each wave a new combination of traits in hosts and parasites. As the tide goes in and out, the rock does not leap into a new form. It very gradually becomes something more rounded. The gentle rhythm continues, and there is no need to rush. One of the soothing features of this long game is that it rarely has a final move. Hosts and parasites are bound together in a dance that never quite ends. A parasite that is too severe can reduce its own opportunities, while a host that is too impenetrable might spend too much energy on defenses and too little on the other quiet necessities of life. Over time, they drift toward a middle way. This is not a moral middle, just a functional one. To persist, each must find a place where existence is feasible for both, a shared corridor where the host survives and the parasite survives alongside. The corridor can single sharp line. It is more like a pathway through tall grass, trodden often enough to be visible, soft to the step, winding gently around shallow dips and small stones. If you listen closely to this shared corridor, you might imagine the immune system as a library, a softly lit hall with shelves of old notes and new annotations. The host collects quiet experiences, memories of encounters, patterns of shapes and smells at the cellular level. The parasite, patient in its own way, tries new spellings of itself, small changes to the pattern of its outer coat, a tiny shift in how it folds or how it displays a signal. The host learns to recognize that new spelling, and the parasite changes again. The pace is not furious, it is steady, like someone adjusting a blanket at night until it drapes just right. Think about plants, standing very still and yet slowly keeping records of what visits them. In the soft fields and the woodland edges, a plant might face a fungus or a rust, a small visitor that uses its leaves as a canvas. The plant responds with molecules that can impede entry, thickening a threshold like a door frame reinforced with an extra strip of wood, or sending a quiet pulse that changes the chemistry of a leaf so it is less welcoming. The fungus tries a new way in, perhaps looking for a different seam, and the plant notices that seam over the generations, fills it gently, one season after another. In plant biology, there is a steady conversation between effort and response, where a single shape on a parasite surface meets a matching shape in the plant, like a particular key meeting a matching lock. Over time, keys and locks drift into new forms. When a key no longer fits, the parasite looks for another. When shadows change, the plant adjusts its inner furniture. Nothing is abrupt. The gentle rhythm continues. The quiet artistry of coevolution is visible beyond plants and microbes. Imagine a small bird constructing a nest, weaving strands of grass with patient beak movements, building a shallow cup. Another bird watches from a distance. It has learned across many seasons that placing its egg in this nest means its young will be cared for. The host bird eventually notices, in tiny hereditary ways, that some eggs do not look exactly like its own. Over many cycles, the host becomes a little better at recognizing certain markings. The visitor bird adjusts its markings as well. Not all hosts check carefully. Not all visitors choose the same nests. The whole landscape is a patchwork of outcomes, but across it all, an even pulse of adaptation is at work. The tone is not urgent. It is as calm as moss growing on the side of a stone. Consider the difference between a passenger and a partner, and how that difference is sometimes blurry. Some organisms that begin as passengers become, slowly and without fanfare, helpful companions. The lines between parasitism and mutualism are not fences. They are gradients built of context. In one environment, a hitchhiker may pull a little too hard, leaving the host a bit weary, while in another, the same hitchhiker might be more restrained, balancing costs with tiny benefits, such as discouraging more damaging visitors. Over very long spans, the two can settle into a compatible feels almost invisible, as quiet and inevitable as a shadow on a wall at sunset. The gentle rhythm continues, and as you breathe, you might imagine your own inner ecosystem, a community of countless invisible partners who cue and circulate, most of them neutral or helpful, some of them testing the boundaries, all of them moving very slowly across the nights and days of your life. Picture an ancient forest floor, leaf litter soft and damp, the air cool and smelling faintly of soil. Ant colonies hum below the surface, their tunnels like intricate lacework. Some ants have learned to take care of other species, to shelter small insects that provide sweet droplets in return. Some ants are deceived by lookalikes that move and smell like colony members. It is not a war beneath the soil. It is slower and more measured, like the way tree roots quietly avoid stones, the way water finds a path of least resistance through sand. Ants evolve new ways of recognizing scent cues, and the imitators refine their disguises. They change slightly, then slightly again, each change small enough to pass in silence. If you could listen with your fingertips, you would feel the gradualness of it, the long patience. You might imagine lakes where fish carry tiny passengers on their gills, and the fish develop thicker mucus that discourages clinging. The passenger tries new anchoring methods, lighter ones that do not irritate as much, because a calmer host gives a better home. In time, the surface of the fish becomes like a botanical garden of small bumps and grooves, each a quiet nod to past encounters. Nothing loud happens here. Instead, many faint lines of influence add up to a shape. The lake is calm, and the moon rises slowly. In the background of this world runs the notion that too much harm is not sustainable. A parasite that removes the very platform it stands on has stepped too far. Nature often trims those branches by simple arithmetic. Fewer hosts, fewer opportunities. The result is a gentle pressure that nudges both host and visitor toward a compromise. Some visitors soften, causing less disturbance. Some hosts ease their defenses in a directed way, encouraging peace with familiar guests, because the cost of constant vigilance is high. This we call tolerance, a quiet acceptance that reduces friction. In the softness of night, tolerance sounds like a hush that spreads through a room, asking everyone to speak more quietly. In the microcosm, viruses drift through populations with quiet tenacity. To be present at all, they must find a place to copy themselves, often within the careful machinery of a host cell. The host cell guards itself with locked doors and alarms, small proteins that change shape to block entry, tags that mark intruders for removal. Viruses adjust their outer surfaces, the patterns that the alarms look for. The cell revises what it expects to see. The code changes, letter by letter, in a script that is rewritten slowly, written over cleanly, and read again by the next generation. To step back is to see not a jewel, but a wave-like pattern, continuously refined. Even their timing changes. Some parasites choose to knock gently and wait, letting the host continue with daily habits while quietly taking what is needed. Others results are distinct, and the outcomes are a series of gentle trade-offs, where hosts live longer and encounter fewer new individuals. Quiet, longer-term visitors often do better. Where gatherings are frequent, frequent hopping can be successful. In both situations, adjustments appear in small increments, like a person turning the volume knob until the music is barely there. Each species finds a setting that lets it persist alongside its partner. The air in this story is filled with soft metaphors because nature builds with analogies. Think of receptors as docks where boats moor. Think of proteins as fabrics, hemmed or unhemmed. Think of behaviors as weather, smoothing some days and roughening others. A parasite approaches a dock. Sometimes it uses a rope that matches the cleats. Sometimes it uses a new knot. The dock might be reinforced with added posts, new cleats set slightly out of alignment so the old rope no longer catches cleanly. The boat refits its loops. It is a calm harbour with tides that rise and fall, and the work happens over many cycles. The hosts themselves are not uniform. In a forest or a city, some individuals are more robust, some are more easily disturbed. The variability becomes like a mosaic floor, with tiles of slightly different shades. Parasites moving across this mosaic encounter different footholds. They thrive in some corners, manage in others, and fade in a few. Over time, their map of the mosaic becomes more detailed, tracing the easiest paths. Hosts benefit from this mosaic because a landscape of differences slows the visitor. No system is all one colour, and that is part of the gentle stability. Imagine yourself walking through a garden at night. The leaves are silvered by moonlight. Crickets keep time. On a trellis, a parasitic vine has looped itself around a host's stem. The loops are not tight with urgency. They are slow and patient, aligning the vine with the host's own growth. The host thickens its stem, adds a little lignin, a little strength, and the vine feels heavier against the new resistance. The vine sends out another loop a bit farther up where there is less reinforcement. The host continues its slow construction, not to force the vine away, but to keep its own core intact. If you look again weeks later, the shape will be the same, but more settled, each loop accommodated by thicker tissue beneath. In the ocean, imagine a tiny crustacean living among the gills of a calm fish, where water moves like a cool breeze through blinds. The fish is not inert. It adjusts the rate of water flow, alters mucus composition subtly, sends small peptides into the stream. The crustacean carries small changes from its parents, slightly different bristles that cling or release. The result is a dynamic equilibrium. The fish does not live alone. The crustacean does not live without. The system continues, not because anyone wins, but because the pace of adjustment matches the pace of gentle friction. Within the human story, humanity has its own long game with many organisms. We learn to live with certain bacteria, to treat them as neighbours. They occupy niches on our skin, in our intestines, on our tongues. They become part of our personal landscape. The immune system, if it is healthy and even-tempered, recognizes when the situation is calm. Even the word defense is soft in this context, because the body's responses are about balance as much as they are about confrontation. The quiet night inside you is full of steady caretaking. Some parasites, over very long periods, embed themselves so deeply in the history of a host that they become foundational partners. An old retroviral insertion in a mammal's lineage can become part of the genetic equipment for building something new, like a membrane used in early development. What once looked like a hitchhiker becomes a structural beam holding up a privacy wall in a quiet house. The boundaries change because time is patient. Consider also those microbes that live within insects, passed from mother to offspring, living in dedicated cells. They are effectively family members now, specializing in tasks the host no longer handles alone. Without them, the simple facts of growth falter. The long game writes those shared arrangements into the blueprint. If we slow down further, we can think about the way selection itself is not a drumbeat, but a breeze, sometimes strong and sometimes gentle, moving pollen here, moving seeds there, moving a lineage of traits by small increments. The breeze passes through both host and visitor, a defense that is too costly, like a cloak that is too heavy, slows the host, a tactic that is too risky, like a jump that is too far, thins the visitor. Over many seasons, the components align, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to function, enough to keep going. The gentle rhythm continues, and as you relax, you might feel that steady alignment in your own breath, the in and out that is never forced. Now, imagine a research lab bathed in quiet light, shelves lined with petri dishes like pale moons. Scientists watch microbes and hosts interact in miniature, compressing the long dance into manageable observations. They are not seeking spectacle. They are looking for quiet inflection points, places where a tiny change might shift a curve. They watch as a bacterium that thrives at a certain temperature becomes slightly less comfortable. At that temperature, when the host shifts its internal climate, they measure small things, a fraction of a degree, a faint change in acidity, the presence of a molecule that did not appear yesterday. It is like listening to a whisper through a door, interpreting nuance. Interpretation itself is slow, and interpretations invite more interpretation, a chain of careful notes, an acknowledgement of how much there is to learn. The result is a map of gentle gradients. On a hillside, imagine sheep grazing in a quiet, rounded meadow, their breath visible in cool air. In their pastures, tiny organisms swirl among blades of grass. Farmers learn across generations to rotate where the sheep graze, to break the cycle of certain visitors that rely on predictable paths. The visitors, in turn, adjust their timing, a little earlier one year, a little later the next. The result is a pattern like a tartan, lines of practice and lines of response woven together without clashing. It is as much about predictability and pause as it is about action. The meadow remains soft and green. In the insect world, picture hosts in one region settle on one type of adjustment, in another region a different adjustment is favoured. The two combine like threads twisted in different hues, forming local stories that are similar but never the same. The notion of the Red Queen, always running to stay in the same place, can be softened into something more like always breathing to keep the body's stillness. Each breath re-establishes a quiet status. Hosts and parasites adjust so that the relationship feels steady in the present, even though the underlying traits are moving. If you stand back, the stillness is real. Up close, there is motion, but it is slow and graceful. Motion is not alarm, it is maintenance. As you listen to these words, you can let the idea of maintenance settle over you, like a blanket, a reminder that most life is a long patience. There is a gentle distinction between resistance and tolerance that matters in this story. Resistance is like adding locks and bolts to keep visitors out. Tolerance is like rearranging a room so that a visitor, if present, causes less disruption. Resistance has costs. Tolerance has costs. In different environments, different balances are preferred. Over many generational moments, selection leans toward the balance that asks for the least trouble. In quiet times, tolerance can be favored because it uses fewer resources and leads to fewer collateral adjustments. In more turbulent settings, resistance may be necessary. These shifts are not abrupt. They are gradual, like the shift in daylight across a porch as the sun turns. Some parasites are transmitted vertically, from parent to offspring, like a family heirloom passed down softly, handled with care. These visitors tend to become gentler in their presence because the host's success is their own success. Others pass between unrelated hosts horizontally, moving through social space. For them, being a little more noticeable may not be as costly. The two modes encourage different strategies that reverberate through their lineages. The long game is not a single game. It is many variations with similar quiet melodies. Different species of host can share the same parasite, just as different trees can share a patch of mistletoe. In those cases, the visitor has to maintain a broader repertoire of keys for a broader set of locks. The host species, in turn, influence one another's experiences without meeting. If one host species grows more and the other shrinks, the parasite's traits might drift accordingly. The whole community shifts like a mobile hanging above a sleeping child, one side moving gently and the other responding, the balance always refound. Coevolution is communal more often than it is isolated, a chorus rather than a duet, though at any moment you might hear only two voices clearly. Sometimes a parasite becomes an entire school for the immune system, testing the lessons of recognition in ways that are not overly distressing. The immune system learns from interaction. It refines its ability to distinguish between self and other, between harmless and harmful. Like a librarian who gradually knows where every book should go, the immune system acquires a sense of order, a sense of what presence is expected on which shelf. Over time, the shelves fill with helpful notes. If you picture it, the library is warm, the floors creak softly, gentle ventilation system is never intrusive. Now imagine the evolutionary landscape as a soft three-dimensional surface with peaks and valleys that represent how well a certain combination of traits performs. Hosts and parasites move across this surface, not by leaping, but by taking small steps that increase comfort. Sometimes they walk uphill, sometimes along the side of a hill, sometimes they find themselves in a gentle valley that allows rest. The surface itself moves, because what is comfortable today depends on what the other partner is doing and on what the environment is offering. Rain changes the texture of the ground. Sunlight warms a path and makes it more inviting. Everything is interlinked, but nothing is frantic. Through all of this, the lines between parasitism and predation and mutualism and commensalism are not strict borders, but soft transitions. An organism can be a quiet helper in one context and a quiet burdensome presence in another. The switch depends on the conditions, the other members of the community, and the specific moment in the long game. The watchword is flexibility, implemented not with sudden decisions, but with slow increments. In your own life, you may have found that certain routines are welcome in one season and heavy in another. The body learns when to hold and when to release. Ecosystems do the same at their own scale and on their own calendar. Let us pause very gently at a midpoint in this evening drift. If your mind has stayed with us, that is lovely, and if it has wandered, that is welcome too. What topic should we cover next? Imagine a timeline rolled out on a long table. At one end, early organisms explore basic interactions, simple thefts of energy, simple defenses. At the other end, complex arrangements yield a patterned world where many rules are already written. The middle of the table is most of the table. Here, the majority of life's daily work occurs: eating, reproducing, growing, adjusting. Parasites are not separate from this labor. They are variations on how to make a living. Many evolve ways to require less from the host, to become more efficient, to match the host's rhythm. In some cases, the parasite becomes a specialist, tied closely to one host. In others, it remains a generalist, gliding across several hosts with a lighter touch. Specialism is like a seed that only sprouts in a particular soil. Generalism is like a seed that can sprout in many. Quietly, behavioral defenses accumulate alongside physiological ones. A host comes to prefer certain resting places where visitors are less common, or to eat certain plants that make its body less inviting. Parasites nudge behaviors in their favor as well, not with loud commands, but with faint influences that tilt a choice. In the grand scale, the selection of roosting spots, of pathways between water and bedding, of partners and schedules, all become part of the coevolutionary texture. Patterns of street lights influence the insect visitors of urban birds. Patterns of crops influence the presence of hitchhikers among fields. Boundaries are drawn by routine. Consider again the long patience of immune memory. When a host is exposed to a visitor, its internal library adds a card second meeting to be smoother. The parasite recognizes this and adjusts. It can vary its cover, changing small features to avoid the librarian's eye. The host strengthens certain shelves, buying time when a familiar visitor arrives. Against this backdrop, the evolution of hosts and parasites is an exercise in learning how to pay attention without becoming overwhelmed. Too much attention means exhaustion. Too little means trouble. The sweet spot is revisited and rediscovered, not once, but repeatedly, each time with minor variations that make sense only over long stretches. Balance leads to what ecologists sometimes call a stable coexistence. This does not mean unchanging, it means changing within bounds. The bounds are set by what is available to be eaten, by how crowded or sparse the setting is, by how quickly organisms can find new places. The gentle rhythm continues, guided by these external cues. Across seasons, animals shift their ranges slightly. Plants germinate earlier or later by a week. Microbes turn on or off certain genes depending on ambient warmth. Each small shift ripples through the network of interactions, and the network, accustomed to ripples, settles again. There is a soft poetry in host specificity. Some parasites are so specialized that they feel like custom-made gloves, each finger tailored to a precise length and curve. These pairs have evolved together for so long that the fit is remarkable. Such specialization can be fragile, though. If the host declines, the parasite can have nowhere else to go. The long game teaches a kind of humility. Being everywhere is robust but inefficient. Being precise is elegant but risky. Somewhere in between lies a robust elegance, where a parasite is tuned to its host but can manage others in a pinch, and a host is tuned to certain visitors but not rigid. We can explore the idea of virulence as a dial, not a switch. When the dial is turned up, the visitor takes more from the host and may be noticed more, potentially shortening the time available for it to continue its cycle. When the dial is turned down, the visitor takes less, becomes a quieter presence, and perhaps stays longer. The setting of this dial is influenced by the route the visitor uses to move, by the density of hosts, and by background conditions like temperature and humidity. Evolution is the long process of adjusting the dial and seeing which settings are feasible in different rooms. In some stories, a parasite actually protects its host from other, more damaging visitors. This protection can be direct, by occupying a niche that blocks others, or indirect, by stimulating defenses enough to keep sharper intruders at bay. Hosts may accept these quiet bodyguards, even at a small cost, because the alternative is heavier. The long game rewards such layered arrangements. It likes redundancy, like extra stitches on a hem that prevent fraying. If you visualize your own garden of microbes, you might picture a calm crowd where everyone has a place and no one is shouting. Geography adds another layer of softness to this story. Mountains and rivers and deserts act as gentle separators, shaping traffic. In one valley, a host and parasite pair might have settled into a particularly comfortable configuration. In another, the same pair might be in a longer negotiation. What works in humidity does not work in another. What works under one light regime does not work under another. Diversity, in this sense, is the scattering of many solutions across the map. It is not a single best answer, but many good enough answers, adapted to specific quiet realities. As you imagine the map, you can see it shaded in gradually changing tones, rather than stark blocks. The genetic details underneath these stories are themselves soothing in their smallness. A single letter change can make a key slightly different, and across a population, many such small changes are tested quietly. Rarely does a single change determine the whole outcome. Rather, many small contributors add up to a smoother interaction. The host adjusts a receptor, the parasite adjusts a surface protein. The host modifies how many copies of a receptor it displays in a given tissue. The parasite modifies how it times the expression of its coat. These are not fireworks. They are like the difference between a whisper and a softer whisper. It is calming to recognize that randomness plays a role too, not as chaos but as gentle variability. Some changes are neutral, and they drift through populations like a subtle motif in music that reappears without demanding attention. A neutral change can set the stage for later adjustments, making them easier or harder, but often without intention, simply because of the order in which events occur. The long game incorporates chance without giving it the steering wheel. The road is still steady. In human relationships to parasites, management often echoes nature's own strategies. Instead of trying to eliminate every visitor, systems shift toward making the environment less attractive to visitors that cause heavy burdens, while allowing quiet neighbors to stay. This concept is present in agriculture, where farmers sometimes introduce a less harmful strain of a pathogen that outcompetes a more harmful one, resulting in gentler outcomes. Instead of hard victory, there is soft balance. The quiet solution lasts longer. Imagine now a timeline of a human lifetime, the small changes that settle into the body's routines. Infancy is full of introductions. The immune system builds its library shelves and selects its first books. Childhood and adolescence fill the catalogue further. Adulthood refines it, reshelving, discarding some, adding new additions. Old age thins and thickens different parts of the collection. Along the way, the body has many quiet interactions with visitors and neighbors. Some nights you sleep less, some more. Some winters are colds, some are warmth. The body's adaptiveness is continuous, not jagged. It is like walking a long path where the slope rises and falls gently. The ecology of parasites includes a great deal of timing. Many life cycles are set to the calendar of the host. Over generations, parasites learn when a host will be in a certain place, when a host's defenses are lower, when young hosts are present. Hosts learn to offset those patterns, shifting their own timing by small amounts to avoid peak overlap. The resulting pattern is like two metronomes placed side by side. Sometimes they fall into sync, other times they drift apart, creating a syncopated rhythm that reduces direct contact. The metronomes never clash. They find a joint tempo over time. In shifting climates, the long game carries on by adjusting parameters, not by rewriting rules. A small warming alters the number of generations a parasite can fit into a season. A small drying alters how long a stage can survive outside a host. Hosts adjust their ranges, their migration times, their reproduction. The elegant part here is the continuity. Life does not tear up the plan, it turns the pages slowly. The same gentle dance persists on a slightly different floor. The social habits of hosts matter too. In species that live solitary lives, parasites must find ways to persist at low density, often by staying longer in each host or by aligning with intermediate hosts. In species that live in social groups, with grooming and shared spaces, parasites may rely on these gatherings. Hosts in social groups evolve grooming behaviors and communal care, turning the group's warmth into a functional defense. Cooperative behavior becomes part of the immune system's outer layer. Imagine a circle of primates, hands moving gently through fur, an act that is both social and quietly fitness enhancing. The scene is peaceful. The rhythm of hands reinforces the rhythm of biology. Consider again the notion of brood parasitism, but see it through a gentle lens. A host species experiences the occasional extra egg. Over time, it arranges its nest check routine to include subtle cues. It pays more attention to certain markings, to the weight of the clutch beneath its body. It does not panic, it refines. The parasitic bird, in response, practices mimicry with a light touch. The eggs become better matched in color and speckle, and the timing of laying aligns with the host's habits. The entire interaction becomes a meditation on attention. Too little attention, and the host invests in an outsider unknowingly. Too much attention, and it risks neglecting its own. The host generations find a middle ground, a soft practice of noticing that is appropriately sensitive. The long game tells us something about patience as a survival tool. Slowness is not the absence of action, it is the consistency of small actions. Hosts and parasites alike benefit from patience. For parasites, patience allows them to use the host's resources without triggering alarm. For hosts, patience allows them to identify patterns that matter and ignore those that do not. In this sense, the long game is a lesson for many spheres. A quiet habit is a force. A low hum sustains. All through these examples, there is a motif of trade-offs. A host can invest more in reproduction or more in defense. A parasite can invest more in disguises or more in moving to a new host. Energy is finite. Time is finite. The long game is about budgeting with care. It is about putting a little aside for tomorrow, both for host and visitor. Excess draws attention. Subtlety is often safe. In coevolution, feedback loops matter. When a host changes, the parasite experiences a new landscape. When the parasite parasite changes, the host revises its expectations. The pairing creates a loop where causes and effects are intertwined. The loop is slow because generations are not instantaneous. The slowness gives the system stability, like a car with a gentle suspension that soaks up bumps. The ride is smoother, even though the road has irregularities. That softness is part of the persistence. When ecologists describe these relationships mathematically, they often use simple equations that capture the essence of this give and take. The equations are clean, but the world adds texture, heterogeneity, chance, immigration, memory. In a field or a lake or a forest, the equations fold into lived patterns. A scientist might draw a curve that shows how a parasite's presence rises and falls over time. The curve's peaks are not cliffs but rounded hills. Between hills are valleys where hosts regain strength and visitors become sparser. Then the curve rises again, but often to a different height, a reminder that memory and variation alter the future gently. Think of the idea of refuges, places where either the host or the parasite finds shelter from the other's influence. A parasite might find refuge in a stage of its life that the host cannot reach. A host might provide refuge for susceptible individuals by harboring resistant ones alongside them, so that the parasite's successful forms do not dominate. This is like planting a variety of seeds that bloom at different times, ensuring that your garden always has some color, even as individual plants take rests. Refuges create a softer pattern of selection, preventing extremes from taking over too quickly. The result is resilience. You can also picture scenarios where two parasites interact through their host. One might make subtle changes to the host that affect the other's fortunes. The network of interactions becomes layered, with edges that carry influence in both directions. Over time, the host's body learns to handle this network, accommodating one to reduce the risk of another, adjusting internal chemistry to keep the whole system within comfortable bounds. The intricate arrangement is very similar to how a city's traffic patterns are influenced by many small rules and habits. Red lights, yield signs, unspoken courtesies at four-way stops, all partake. The flow is not perfect, but it is functional and durable. In long-lived hosts, the timeline of immunity evolves with the host's own life history. Early life invites some teachers and discourages others. Midlife refines skills. Later, life rebalances priorities, sometimes focusing on avoiding overreaction, because overreaction can be costly. Parasites, being many and varied, find their own windows. The alignments can be remarkably stable, resulting in patterns of subtle illnesses in youth and fewer in maturity, or the reverse, depending on the pair involved. These patterns are not all sorrow. Many are simply part of the fabric of existence, like passing rain showers or the periodic arrival of migrating birds. One can find beauty in the idea that coevolution creates identity. A species is partly defined by its interactions, its receptors, its behaviors, its timing, its secrets, visits and who is avoided. Hosts carry signatures of old interactions. You can read a history in their genes, in their habits, in the way they brace for a touch. Parasites carry signatures as well, reflections of the locks they have learned to pick, the hallways they have learned to navigate. Each is the mirror of the other, softened by time. The slow, intricate changes that accumulate can produce emergent calm. If a system with many parts is allowed to adjust gradually, it can arrive at a place where the parts align in a low-energy arrangement. Energy here is metaphorical and literal. There is less friction, fewer abrupt departures from equilibrium. Think of a river meandering across a floodplain, flattening out and becoming wide and slow. The river still flows. Nothing has ceased, but the gentle pace means less erosion, more stability, more room for life at the margins. Host and parasite, through countless interactions, can produce something like that meandering river, a state that endures because it is comfortable. Some visitors occupy the margins of hosts, living on the outside rather than the inside. Mites among feathers, small leeches on the skin of a turtle, louse insects nesting in fur. Hosts grow better feathers, smoother skin, more effective grooming habits. The visitors refine their claws, their adhesive pads, their skins resistant to drying. These are tactile stories, full of texture and movement and touch, but at slow speed. It is a ballet in which the choreography is built over centuries. Transmission is a term you might think of as harsh, but we can picture it as a handoff in a relay, smooth and unhurried when the runners have practiced together enough. For parasites, the handoff between hosts is a critical step. Their bodies or propagules must remain viable for a time outside, in the air or on the ground or in water. They evolve coatings that protect for just long enough. Hosts evolve surfaces that discourage lingering. Coatings become thinner when the environment is humid to save energy. Surfaces become more textured in dry places. Each tune is adjusted to a local radio station that plays softly in the background, always on. Sometimes a parasite nudges a host's behavior in subtle ways that increase the chance of handoff. The nudge need not be dramatic. It can be as small as making a host prefer a slightly different microhabitat or altering appetite briefly. In response, host lineages can evolve a counter-nudge, reasserting a preference for safer places or altering schedules. The interplay is gentle, like two metronomes gradually resynchronizing after a small disturbance. It is reassuring to realize that in many systems, the long game reduces extremes. A parasite that thrives by making a host very ill may run out of hosts, and so, over time, forms that are quieter and more sustainable take over. A host that pours resources into constant high-alert defenses may leave fewer descendants, so lineages that select for routine and measured responses become more common. Drift toward the center is not guaranteed, but it is a frequent theme when the conditions are stable enough. The center is not a point, it is a comfortable region. In thinking about parasites, we often focus on the costs to the host, but the long game includes quiet benefits. The presence of a visitor can fortify a host against future disturbances, simply because the machinery of response is maintained in a ready state. Exposure can be like turning on a car and letting it run for a few minutes each day so that the battery stays healthy. Too much idle time is wasteful. A little keeps things conditioned. In human communities, children who grow up with a diverse set of microbial encounters often develop balanced immune systems. This is another example of how subtle presence can facilitate long-term stability. The role of technology in our understanding adds to the calm. As our instruments become more sensitive, we see nuances that were previously blurred. Where once we saw a single parasite species, we now see a constellation of related strains, each with its own mild preference. Where once we saw a host's response as a single event, we now appreciate that it is layered and timed. The increased resolution does not make the story more frantic, it makes it more textured. It is like moving closer to a painting and noticing delicate brushwork. Many organisms that we consider parasites serve broader ecological functions that, in the long game, contribute to the maintenance of biodiversity. A parasite that preferentially affects the most common host genotype can prevent any single host genotype from overtaking the population entirely, thereby preserving a quiet heterogeneity. That heterogeneity, in turn, provides resilience to environmental changes. The world's stability is often in its variety, and parasites, though often seen as unwelcome, can help keep that variety alive. This is not a celebration of trouble. It is a recognition that the absence of uniformity is friendlier to life than sameness. Studies of coevolution also reveal the value of slowness in our own practices. Hasty action can simplify systems in ways that make them less robust. Consider pesticides and their targets. If applied too quickly, with too narrow a focus, they can encourage the rapid rise of resistant forms, leading to cycles of escalation. A measured approach, with rotation of methods, refuges for susceptible forms, and integrated practices, can slow the process, stretching it into a less abrupt rhythm. This mirrors the long game's own preference for moderation. Coevolution extends to networks beyond host and parasite. Flowers and their pollinators also co-evolve, choosing shapes and scents that fit best with each partner's parts. While this is a mutualistic example, it occupies the same continuum. Something similar can happen when a parasite inadvertently becomes a vector for the plant's pollen or an organism's spores, carrying them while going about its own business. The web of life captures all these exchanges and makes something functional of them. Another gentle dimension is co-speciation, when host and parasite lineages split in tandem, like two lines tracing parallel paths on a graph. Over time, as a host species becomes two, often because their environments diverge, its associated parasites can split as well, each adapting to the new context. If you draw the family trees of host and parasite and lay them side by side, you sometimes find that the branching patterns are similar. The matching is not perfect, because switching and loss can occur, but the overall parallelism is a calm testament to shared histories. Hosts often evolve ways to keep parasites at manageable levels by harnessing beneficial microbes. In plants, certain endophytes, microbes that live within tissues, can deter more troubling pathogens. In animals, normal flora occupy niches that might otherwise be open to more aggressive visitors. Maintaining these protective communities is an art formed of small habits. The substances plants exude from their roots, the diets animals maintain. Over time, these habits are selected at a population level. The long game promotes ecosystems within ecosystems. There are moments when the long game is interrupted by novel introductions, such as when species that have never met come into contact. At first, the interactions can be rough because the host has no tailored defenses and the parasite has not been softened by long association. Over time, however, even these new relationships tend to settle. Hosts learn, parasites learn. If the relationship persists, the edges wear smooth. In human history, the pace of travel changed the frequency of such introductions. The resulting patterns were sometimes heavy, but the long game worked to produce balance, and modern understanding helps to guide that process with care. In winter, when many organisms rest in some way, some parasites rest as well, entering dormant stages. This dormancy is a patient strategy. It aligns with a host's slowdown, preventing the parasite from exhausting itself on a quiet landscape. When spring returns, both host and parasite wake in step. This shared seasonality is another layer of coevolution, a schedule that smooths conflicts and matches needs. If you imagine the seasons as a gentle breathing of the planet, you can see hosts and parasites breathing along with it. We can turn our attention to a microscopic scene where a bacteriophage, a virus of bacteria, glides toward a bacterial cell. The phage has tail fibers that feel along the cell surface like fingertips. When a suitable receptor is found, a precise fit occurs. This fit is not violent. It is like a hand finding the right door handle. The outcome can be a gentle incorporation of the phage's genetic material into the bacterial genome, where it sleeps as a prophage, sometimes bringing a small benefit, sometimes just waiting. In that waiting, the bacterium lives its life, dividing calmly. The prophage is copied along. Under certain conditions, the prophage can awaken and enter a more active phase. Even here, the long game influences whether waiting or acting is preferred, depending on the host's condition. The decision is not conscious, but it is conditional, another reflection of life's sensitivity to context. Some parasites have complex life cycles that require multiple hosts in sequence. Each step is like a door in a long hallway that must be unlocked in order. These cycles appear elaborate, but they are built gradually. A lineage that has already found one host adds a second in a small way. Then the configuration persists because it works. Over many generations, the hallway is refined. The timing of developmental stages aligns with the moments when the next host is present. The behaviors that increase encounter rates become more likely. The host species in turn develop habits that reduce encounters in the more costly stages. The hallway remains, but visits are of different frequencies across humans as villains in perpetual struggle, we can see them as parts of an intricate story that includes host well-being. Management strategies can then focus on stability, on preventing new harsh introductions, on preserving diversity, on fostering the quiet rivals of more burdensome visitors, on supporting host health so that the balance is easier to maintain. Just as a gardener encourages ground cover to prevent weeds without bare soil, a health system can encourage protective communities to prevent trouble without the need for constant alarm. Calm is both a feeling and a strategy. If you step outdoors on a quiet evening and listen, you might hear a soft hum of insects, the steady chirps of night voices, a gentle breeze. The world is not silent, it is simply unhurried. Nature's long game with parasites fits this soundscape. It is not a battle drum, but a slow music that persists as the days and seasons pass. Wherever there is life, there is the possibility of this coevolutionary dance. It is neither sinister nor heroic. It is foundational and ongoing. Consider the future. As climates continue to shift and as species move, the patterns will rearrange. The basic themes will persist. Trade-offs, schedules, tolerances, mosaics. Hosts will adjust their thresholds. Parasites will adjust their approaches. New balances will emerge, stable for a time, and then remodeled. The continuity is reliable. It is worth sleeping with that thought, the thought of a world that prefers gently weighted outcomes when given time and room. Within your body, tonight, 1,000,000 small decisions are being made by cells that decide whether to rest or to respond. Most choose rest. Some maintain low-level readiness. The feeling of comfort you have now mirrors that choice. Your mind can let small concerns drift like dandelion seeds caught in a corridor of warm air. The seeds will settle. Tomorrow will come. The long game will not be resolved tomorrow or ever. It will simply continue, and that is sufficient. Let us return once more to plants, those patient teachers. When a plant recognizes a familiar visitor, it turns on pathways that strengthen cell walls, produce subtle compounds, adjust turgor pressure. These are home maintenance tasks: repair, reinforcement, a bit of cleaning. Plants that have seen more visitors develop more practiced routines, and that practice is written into their genetic instructions passed down to their offspring. The plant's lineage then moves through seasons with fewer jolts. The visitor's lineage responds with refined entries, more precise timings, and sometimes a shift to a different species of host if the path becomes too narrow. This is a careful negotiation that neither side controls entirely, and yet it arrives at functioning arrangements again and again. In the flow of water, parasites of amphibians move toward their hosts, guided by temperature gradients and chemical cues. Hosts choose breeding pools with fewer cues, or they change the timing of breeding to avoid peak presence. Across landscapes, these choices ripple into population structures. Pools dry at different rates. Rainfall patterns shift. The cycle particles overlay in layers like translucent sheets, each adding or subtracting a little from the combined picture. The result is an evenly textured tapestry. Sometimes coevolution takes a form that looks like an escalation, with hosts and parasites accumulating features that counter each other in sequence. But in many cases, escalation is limited by costs. A new lock is heavier, a new key is expensive to produce. The long game tends to avoid runaway processes unless the environment makes them necessary. The majority of stories settle into modest armaments, enough to deter most intrusions, enough to permit most visits to be harmless. The comfortable middle keeps systems from tipping. There is grace in the idea of bet hedging, where lineages produce variability in offspring so that some will thrive no matter the circumstances. Hosts may vary their defensive investments across years. Parasites may produce a mix of offspring suited to different microhabitats. This variability is like packing both a sweater and a light shirt when traveling, just in case. It makes the long game more forgiving. It does not demand perfect prediction, only reasonable preparation. We can also appreciate the way that hosts sometimes outsource parts of their defense to social partners. Many animals benefit from group alarm or communal listening. Birds use public information at roost sites to learn where food is safer. These forms of information sharing can reduce encounters with parasites, not by changing the body, but by changing routine. Parasites respond by altering activity peaks or aligning with species that are not attuned to those alarms. The melody remains low. No one shouts. It is a quiet shift in timing. The idea of carrying capacity appears in parasite-host dynamics too. A host can carry a certain load of visitors without substantial decline. Hosts evolve to tolerate a baseline load and to prioritize removal only when thresholds are exceeded. Parasites, in turn, evolve to be mindful of these thresholds in the sense that those forms that avoid triggering removal are the forms that persist. The system has memory and thresholds, not unlike a thermostat set to keep a room comfortable by responding only when the temperature wanders outside a band. Most of the time, the system is within the band and the thermostat is at rest. Regard the quiet power of sleep in this story. Sleep itself modulates host defenses and behaviors in a way that affects interactions with visitors. Many elements of the immune system renew themselves in the dark hours, and behavior slows, giving less opportunity for certain transmissions. From the parasite side, life stages may be keyed to the host's circadian rhythm. Adjustments occur when these rhythms shift. The result is a dynamic that respects daily cycles. Your own rest tonight participates in this natural order. As you slow, the world within slows as well, finding its measured cadence. This has been a wide sweep, and it has remained soft because the subject itself, while often framed in harsh terms, is fundamentally about continuity. Parasites and hosts live together, not by choice, but by the overlapping paths of their survival strategies. The overlapping becomes an interlocking, and the interlocking becomes a gentle machine that runs without rattle when properly oiled by time. disruptions occur, the machine pauses, warms up again, resumes at a slightly different speed. If you step back to see the deep time perspective, you see that parasitism is ancient. It has coexisted with life's origin stories, and it appears in one form or another at every level. In that deep view, what stands out is not conflict, but persistence. The lineages that have lasted are those that learned restraint, hosts that could accommodate without falling, visitors that could feed without breaking. These are the ones that you find today. It is a simple criterion, repeated over and over. Let your thoughts loosen now, like threads that are no longer pulled taut. The landscape we have walked across is broad and forgiving. It accommodates both the presence of guests and the preferences of the house. Coevolution's long